Hello, and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today we're going to talk about grounding and how we need to ground in order to fly. I'm here with Kathleen Wiley, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst, and I am Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer and performer. And Kathleen, you are the one who suggested this topic today, and I really love it. So tell me, what made you want to talk about this right now?
You know, being grounded and connected to our own being, and I think of it sometimes as the ground of our own being and the ground of our own body mind, is the key to being successful in anything and everything that we do. And let's even back it up from success. It's the key to living, to really living. Because if we're not grounded in our own being and in our own body mind, then we are disembodied and we're not really experiencing, we're not feeling fully what it is that's happening to us. So, grounding sometimes gets a bad rap because people think, oh, I just want to fly high. Who wants the constraints of being grounded? But there's a principle in the esoteric spiritual traditions about right limitation, and that when we live within the right limitation of our soul, then everything flows beautifully. And so for me, that principle of right limitation always makes me go back to the idea of being grounded in my own being, which lives in my body mind. So as I think about musicians and I think about my own journey with the harp, I'm aware of how important it is and the difference it makes when I sit down with my heart and I am fully present with the ground of my own being and my body mind versus just sitting down with my body there and then my emotions all caught up in some anxiety with these runaway thoughts about, oh, I should be doing it this way, I should be, or what are they going to think? And then all of a sudden, I'm not able to play because I don't have a ground to stand on, a ground to launch from. So that's what made me want to talk about it. And I can keep going, but
Well, no, I was thinking, oh, what if I never said anything? It would be so exciting to just see what she says. It's making me think. Right now, I'm teaching a big class, but a really an intensive called Holiday Lead Sheet Boot Camp because it's the holidays. And it's all about how to read music from a lead sheet, which is just the melody and the big letters, the chords. And what I discovered is that in order to really be able to do this, you first have to do something I call psyching out the tune. But as you're speaking, I'm realizing that this idea of psyching out, to me, is also something that I call in my life orientation, that I need to orient myself to what I'm doing. And it was interesting to talk to students because what we do when we psych it out is the first thing I tell them to do is stop looking at this like music. I want you to look at it like a picture and see what you can see here that has nothing to do with what you know about music, because there's all these clues about how it's structured and just how it moves and what the gesture of the piece is. And when you're too far into the weeds, you're not getting that. You need to kind of step back and ground in something that is I know how to read music. And many people, I grew up and I didn't know how to read music. And so I had to very quickly start being like, okay, what's the road maps here? What are the road signs? How can I understand what's here? I don't get it. It doesn't mean music to me. So, and what my students started saying was, wow, this is all about breaking it down, distilling it to its structure or its scaffolding. And then when you do that, each piece becomes this fertile ground for infinite performances that can be completely different because you can let me just like
yeah.
let's see what this is. So we'll just, that's we three kings of Orient are. So all I broke that down is just like an A in this is in the key of A minor, and I'm just playing the melody. Right now I'm just playing the melody and the harmonic movement. once I get it down to that and I take away everything else that any other arranger has ever added to that, then I know that that could be, or it could be, or it could be. I don't know if the harp is too loud, and then you can start seeing, and then, or I could improvise on it instead of doing. So then I would realize I've got two things here. I've got a melody, and I've got a harmonic movement. And I can take either one. I can reharmonize this. Or I can take this and I can do something different up here. But I can only do that if I've created that ground. I mean, and this is just the first 2 bars of this tune, and this doesn't even include, you know, adding a tango. Adding rhythms or whatever we want to do. And when you start thinking about all these dimensions of, you've got the melody that you can change, you've got the harmony that you can change, you've got the rhythm and the feel that you can change, but only if it is grounded in what is this tune versus what is all the different ways that people have done it. You break it down to the thing. I could cry. It's so powerful that when you take away everything else and get down to that, the piece opens up like this treasure chest of creativity and infinite expressivity. And so anyway, sorry, I just get excited about that. And it reminds me of what you're talking about in grounding. So, and what I realize is I've been given an insight in that in music. It makes sense to me how to break it down. Other things in life, no idea. No idea how to break them down. So it's just like I have to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and then if I get lost, I'm off.
Yeah. Yes, I hear you. I understand. I resonate. You know, part of DHC, what was going through my mind as you started talking, is I had this fantasy that psyching out the tune was kind of looking at it as if you had a topographical map of the ground you were going to explore. So that initially you have them look for the topography. Where are the hills? Where are the valleys? You know, where does it go up? Where does it come down? Where does it go, you know, undulate? Just like the ground, literally the earth, has so many different expressions in that regard. And that then once that we see the topography of the piece, we get a feel for the terrain, then we can look for the paths. Where are the paths? And that the most well-worn path is the melody. And then perhaps within the melody, we then begin to see the terrain of the harmonic chord progression.
So that's so interesting. I mean, of course, I'm going to think of it different, but yeah, keep going, because that's the beauty of metaphors, is we can use them in different ways. Go on.
Yeah, they speak to us in different ways. And so in some ways, what we are talking about then for our life, if we want to step away from music for a minute and look at how we are in relationships, or how, well, let's just say how we deal with ourselves and taking care of our own needs, then the first thing we have to do is be able to step back and see what is the ground of our being and the topography around our needs. Because, you know, I love, Jung has this little essay where he says there are 5 instinctive factors. And I know I've shared this before, but I just come back to it because it's like, this is like the hills and the valleys. And for me,
by the way, I do need to hear it every time. So I love these repetitions.
Yeah, so he says that these five basic instinctive factors are hunger, sexuality, movement, or the desire for activity, self-reflection, and creativity. So if for a minute we played with that, um, that the chords of our life correspond to these five psychological factors,
Like a
and that
pentatonic scale? I mean, like a 5-note scale or
like
something?
a 5 note scale, and that then every day we're looking to see what are these 5 notes doing, what are these 5 notes, where are they taking me, how are they fitting together, what is the music of my life they're creating. And we began to orient ourselves, psyching out my day according to how is it I'm relating to my hunger, which is not just physical hunger. It may be hunger for touch. It may be hunger for nature. How am I relating for my own sexual need, which can literally be about sex, but more often than not, it's about connection. It's about feeling a deep union, whether it is literally with a sexual partner, or it's with petting my little dog, or it's with having a moment in the sunshine where I just, there's a oneness, there's bliss. What we experience is bliss. Or it's at my heart where I feel that sense of wow, flow. And as you often say, where the instrument is just a part of you. Where is my own desire for activity and movement? What are the impulses? So if we began to play with the ground of our being, looking at these five, we want to call them ground terrains, then we begin to locate ourself and our day. We begin to locate our larger self, our whole self, as it flows in these areas. All too often in our culture and with our fast pace and with all of our goal-driven, purpose-driven, ego-driven life, we forget about the whole. We get one track for what our ego thinks we ought to be doing, and the rest falls away, and then we lose a connection to our ground, the root, what roots us. So,
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking of, I love this idea of locating ourselves in the morning. And I'm imagining, getting up and getting out of bed and being, now, where did I put myself? I know I'm here somewhere. Okay, now let me figure this out. And I also really love this idea of, for me, when you said these words, hunger, I thought of the feeling of hunger, and I thought of the hunger, not just for food, but the hunger to express myself, the hunger to, the curiosity that I have, that's a hunger. And for me, I live completely alone. I'm just started dating, so for me, sex is about my own sexuality, actually embracing that, or being interested in my own sexuality. What is it? What does it mean? Does it have anything to do with my gender? I don't know. All those things, just kind of locating myself. And the idea of movement and action is whether or not I am feeling the desire, and in my case, for completion of things, because I've left many things incomplete in my life, and whether I'm willing to, whether I am sort of serving my fear, or whether I'm serving my desire to act. So to me, there's kind of that balance there in action and self-reflection. I just think this is really interesting, because I have a group that is exploring, a group of women who's exploring the idea of visibility. And right now, we're exploring those words like luminosity and all the different words that go along with visibility. And right now we are exploring the word reflection and what it means, and how light is, we only see it when it's reflected, blah blah blah. Anyway, and then creativity. I'm just so fascinated that what's the difference between creativity and self-reflection? What's the difference between self-reflection and movement or action? Are these different? Are they the same? And where do they? And I'm also thinking about this in music, because there is the bass line, which is the grounding of us. There is the melody, which is the flight of us. Anyway, So my brain is going in a million different directions. Also, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, now, Kathleen, I just signed up for a dating app the other day. Now, how would I approach something new and possibly, um, not dangerous, but that doesn't, I don't feel secure there. And I
Mhm.
think so. So how would anybody? That's my thing right now. So for other people, it may be music. How would I approach that with these five ideas and ground myself in something new and that's a risk?
That's a great question. And as you were articulating those five back to me, part of how I experience it and have observed it with other people is that creativity holds all of the other four. Self reflection holds the previous three. Desire to movement and activity holds the previous two. Sexuality holds the previous one. And hunger is kind of the basic we start at. So by the time we get to a creative project, for instance, what I've experienced in my observation is there is a hunger to connect the union of sexuality and a movement towards something that will reflect or express something in one's own nature that one wants to see more clearly. And that the act of creation is becomes like a mirror through which one experiences something new in one's nature.
Wow. And as you're talking, I'm now I'm thinking hunger is what we feel alone, that we feel completely alone. As we start to understand our sexuality, it implies an other.
Yes.
And as we look for movement and action, we are integrating with the world. So when I think about strings of passion, the seven principles that I came up with or I explored in creativity, the first three are all about our experience. The first three, impulse, structure, and character. And then when you get into roles, you're noticing other people, there are others. And then when you get into practice, you're starting to go into the world. You're starting to take action with music. Practice is an action. So I see movement and action as a way of moving out. And self reflection, I see in the eyes of others or seeing that there are other eyes, whether that's an other of us or a greater, a greater self or other people. And then finally, I'm just excited that creativity is taking our place in
Mhm.
that greater creation, whatever it is. Our,
Well, we can say even
the
within
whole idea,
community.
uh, yeah, and in the community of life.
Yeah, yeah, the larger world community.
Well, then what if people feel like they're not creative?
Well, we're all creative. I mean, I think one of the beautiful things about Jung's work is that these are innate instinctive factors. They're in all of us. There isn't a single person who doesn't have this energy innate within them. Now, conscious connection to it may be what's missing. And so then someone's journey may be about connecting to that. Often what I find when I work with people, when they tell me they're not creative, when we start exploring their life and the things they do day in and day out, we find pockets where they are creative. They're creative in what they do in the kitchen. They're creative in, how they decorate their house. They're creative in yard work. So I think we have to get away from big ideas. Sometimes our big ideas give us definitions that really don't see the day in and day out ways in which we are creative.
Well, as you're talking, you said making that conscious connection to our creativity.
Mhm.
And I find that a lot of times when I'm trying to learn how to do something or try to engage with something, I am often given, here's the best way to do it, or here's the five top ways to do it. Da, 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 da. But I'm always wishing I could find somebody who could break it down and says, this is how it works. Take away it, great, better, virtuosic, whoever, most famous, I don't care. This is how it works in its simplest form. Because if I can understand how it works in its simplest form, I can be creative with it. And that's what I discovered with the you know, I didn't teach for years, and now I have this academy. And it's fascinating because it's almost, many of the people are adult, either beginners or people who came to the harp late, or people who are recovering classical players. And most of them have never been taught how to break it down so that they can be creative with it. And I don't know how to do that either. It requires somebody else who has a bigger understanding. And I'm thinking that, you know, you as a Jungian psychoanalyst, that is what you are doing with some aspect of people. Now, what aspect? I'm doing it for people with music, breaking it down to its simplest, most distilled, beautiful, you know, what would you describe? What is it that you are breaking down for people?
Well, what we break down, well, let me say it differently. We dissipate all of the energy systems that prevent people from knowing these basic truths about themselves. So that the work of analysis, and I believe the work of consciousness, however you do it, the first thing we have to do is we have to, I like to image it as we have to drop down below all of these lofty, disembodied shoulds, must, and ought tos, ideas about who we should be and how we should be, and really see and be with how we are. What is it we really are experiencing? What really is going on inside of us? And when we can begin to see that, then we can begin to differentiate and discern what's in it. And one way of discerning is to look for these 5 instinctive factors at play. There are other models also for how we might discern, but we begin to look and discern what are our basic needs inherent in this basic response that I'm having once I quit giving myself a hard time with all the shoulds, must, and ought tos, and the fact I don't live up to the ideal image that someone's given me or I've adopted. Yeah.
As you're saying this, I'm also thinking when you said break, you know, get it down, and I'm thinking of breaking away all the things that, all the arrangement issues that have been on a music, and getting down to the basics and valuing it.
Yes.
Actually valuing that. That there's a value that is just as great as, you know, whatever, you know, as that, which is this, it's the same thing, it's just fancy.
But I think what you're saying right there is a profound truth. And unfortunately, we so often dismiss the simplicity where the real beauty of our soul is found. And we cover it up under all of this fanciness, whether it's with music or it's in how we live our life. And that we need to get back to our roots, where, you know, if you pull roots up out of the ground of a plant, I mean, they're very bare. You know, they
right, they don't have leaves.
They're not,
right.
yeah, they don't have leaves. They're not covered up. I mean, you see the root. It may have little rhizomes, those little bitty hair-like tentacles. They're not tentacles, but, you know, hair-like structures. But I think that valuing the basics of our own nature, you know, valuing the simple things that show up in those 5 instinctive factors, which we will experience as need and longing and desire.
Now, I love this idea of valuing it, and I often can't find it. And I know that I can find it in music often, and therefore I can share it and show it to others. But I can't find it in, like, let's say social media. Like, I know that I need to be telling people what I'm doing. And I mean, that's part of my job as an artist. And yet, I get onto Facebook and I'm just like, oh, I don't even know what's here. Like, it's just so much stuff. And I literally would need somebody to say, okay, almost like when I was a kid, honestly. I don't know if this is just me, but I remember people saying, okay, now just look over here. Over here is what's important. All the rest of this, those are advertisements, or those are other ideas that other people had. You can look at them, it's okay, but just look over here, because I don't know where to look. And I see that so many of the people who work with me when I'm teaching the music, they don't know where to look. And it's not because they're dumb. Nobody, and I don't think I'm dumb in
Right.
social. I just don't know how to. I don't know what is the. I
Right.
don't know what's the dogs and the ponies, and what's the footsteps.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying to me makes me think about the word education, which comes from the Latin word educare, which means to lead forth. And that we all do need to be led forth to our wholeness and to a fuller, more comprehensive understanding of our own nature and who we are. In music, you're leading your students forth to a greater understanding. Sometimes with social media or computer things, you might or I might need someone to lead me forth towards what what matters to get the result I want, you know. And so part of the key also is when we are in the ground of our own being, we can access clarity for what it is we really want. And we can begin to distill to its purest essence, just like you're doing with the tune, breaking it down to the melody and the harmonic progression. We can distill what's going on inside of us down to the purest essence of what is it I really want here. If what I really want, for instance, on social media is to post notifications, then I find someone who knows how to use the system and say, tell me how to do this. And they tell me, you
Right.
know. But, if we want to know how to feel safe in intimate relationship, then we work with someone where we know we're safe and we can have an experience of being intimate, not sexually in this case, but emotionally, which then allows us to know what it's like to feel safe. Then we venture out in the world and we begin to make friendships and develop relationships, and at some point develop romantic relationships where we know we're safe because we have a template for it.
That's amazing. I mean, as you're saying that, I realize you're right. Especially many of us in musicians don't know what it feels like to be playing something we can play. And I remember that was a big revelation for me when I came to jazz, because up until that point, I had been sort of in the world of classical music, and that's all about you learn a piece, and once you can play that well enough to get on stage, you learn another piece, and you learn another piece, and you learn another, you keep it building your repertoire. But that's not how jazz works. You are not about building your repertoire. You're definitely about building your connection and your creativity, but you may play the same songs every night, and that's the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Every night. It's like a marriage rather than whatever, serial monogamy. I'm not saying classical musicians. Classical musicians are serious in serial monogamy, and jazz musicians are in long term. But no, but then don't get me started, because then jazz musicians would be like polyamorous. Whether no, I'm spending too much time. Um, uh, Come back. Okay, here I am. I'm like all over the place. How would I ground right now?
Yeah, you have to come back to what it is you were really trying to say, which I'm hearing is that playing as a jazz musician opened you up to connect with the simplicity of the structure. And
Okay,
it
go ahead.
allowed you a grounding, where you have been able to expand your skill set, expand your repertoire, expand your comfort and your joy in ways that the structure of classical music didn't allow you to.
Right, right. So with jazz, I was able to understand the dynamic of going back to the same well
Mhm.
every night, to the same or the same conversation. It's like going back to the same conversation every night and seeing where took me that night, so that I wasn't struggling with the structure of the piece. Once I had the structure of the piece, that's when the adventure began.
Mhm.
And so why am I saying this? I mean, what I'm not saying, and I'm looking at, I'm watching the time and stuff. What I'm not saying is I'm thinking, okay, well, you said what matters is I get the results I want. And so I'm realizing that, that's something we need to be clear on. So now on this dating site, and I would love to be there as an adventure in grounding myself.
Mm.
And I would love to be able to go into this um, adventure using these ideas, humor, my understanding of my sexuality, the movement and action, the self reflection, and the creativity to ground me so that that I'm not at the mercy of the thing I'm doing, but that I can actually use it as a tool. And a tool is a partner
Mhm.
versus the tool using you. Like, this is what happens with me on social media or on a dating site. I'm just trying to, like, how do I do this? Versus, you know, I had that experience with a pencil at first, when I was a kid, but now it's become a tool of creativity and connection. And how now, in this more complex world of learning music or learning how to date or whatever it is, how do we how can we step by step try to start bringing in the grounding of these five ideas that you shared?
Well, part of what occurs to me, if we're going to break it down and apply it to your dating app site, is dating apps can flood you with options of, this man's right, that man's right. And so perhaps the grounding might be, what is it you're really hungry for in terms of the kind of friend you want and potential significant other that you want, and having that sense of, what is it I'm really after here? Am I after someone who just wants to have a good time? Am I after someone who just wants a one night stand? Am I wanting someone who really wants to take time and get to know me and just see what unfolds? Am I wanting the quick, immediate fall in love? We often have conflicting things we want. One part of us wants the magical Cinderella Prince Charming, show up, put on the glass slipper, and we're ready to go. You know, um, that usually is a disaster, by the way.
I don't want to miss this experience. Um, just like I don't want my students to miss the experience of shifting from an experience of music where they're sort of at the like they have to figure out how to play this piece, to the
Mhm.
experience of actually knowing how to express the music that's in them. And that journey is a really beautiful journey. And I think that it's this journey from, like, what do I do here, to, oh, I'm actually able to express myself and connect with myself in this environment. That I don't want to miss that journey. And yet, a part of me would be just like, yes, could you just come with a magic wand and boom, okay, now I know how to communicate, or how to do this. But on the other hand, having I if I can break it down now, and if I can, then I'll be able to apply it to other parts of my life that I may not have been able to engage with because I just didn't understand the complexities.
So I think maybe what I'm imagining and feeling with you is that if we break it down, the real hunger for you vis-a-vis going on the dating site is that you really want to know yourself more fully in relationship to someone else.
Yes, yes.
And if that were your sole objective for every interaction you had, you know, that it doesn't become about what's going to happen with this person or will we end up here or there, but it becomes about how am I going to get to know myself more as I get to know this person.
Right. How
And
am
that's
I going to unpack how I'm going to open myself, a little bit more of myself
right.
in this relation. For example, I'm feeling that right in this moment.
Yes.
In this relationship with you, I'm feeling like that is happening.
Yeah. So in this moment, you open with your hunger, open with my hunger for connection, and there is a union that happens, and there is something generative that we create together. And then in our exchange of our ideas, we move towards self reflection, seeing something in our own nature. And then together we create something, or something is created bigger than the two of us. That's how it happens. And we show up every week with just a desire to meet each other around whatever the topic is we've chosen and to be open to getting to know ourselves and each other more fully around that topic. So every week, those five factors are at work. And if we let ourselves move, whether it's in relationship to our music, or it's in relationship to dating, or it's in relationship to how we engage on social media, or any of those things, with what is the primary hunger. And I do believe that underneath all the other hungers, that the fundamental hunger we all have is to know ourselves and to know one another more fully. So to know ourselves and then to know the other, whether the other is the great mystery that some people call God, or the other is you or me, or the other is my pet, or the other is our partner, or the other is the group we're a part of. So I think that there is something magical that happens when we really break it down to that most fundamental hunger. We tend to be defended against that out of prior historical experiences where that hunger wasn't met. So then we get all caught up in all these fancy hungers, displaced hungers. And last week we talked about binging. That's a concrete displaced hunger. Um, and so to be able to break it back down to really what is the melody, what and the harmonic progression of our own basic hunger, our basic need. And I do believe the most basic of all needs is connection to oneself and then connection to the other. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see how that will ground us, that sense of connection between those things. And I'm thinking that this sort of I'm always thinking that there's three things. It's three seems to like the three I remember learning a three-legged stool is always stable versus a four-legged stool. I just remember learning that as a kid. Because three is a plane, and 3 points will create a plane. And so I'm thinking relationship to myself, relationship to a human, and relationship to something that is, um,
Greater than the self, if we want to use the 12-step language.
sure, greater than myself, or deeper, greater than either self, either of the selves, and deep. Yeah. Yes, those three points seem to create a stable sense of grounding.
Yes, and they do. And they
Right.
do. Yeah.
Wow. Kathleen, thank you.
You're
This was,
welcome. It's a great reminder today for me also.
yeah, and I just want to say it's really funny because when you said you were almost apologetic when you brought up those five points, and yet I'm now thinking, no, I want you to bring those up every week. yes or no, but I mean, the point is being reminded of these simple things so that we can actually use them in our days and then figuring out how to apply them. It's not, the application is what's marvelous. Getting these down to 5 things, and then how do you apply it to dating? How do you apply it? I probably could apply it to brushing my teeth if I wanted to. So thank you so much. I love this. This just felt like magical. And now I'm looking more forward to even the dating experience now that I know what I'm looking for, that I'm looking for something deeper in my engagement, even with the device that's in between me and other people, or that's both in between and connecting, which is
Yes.
true of anything. Yeah. Thank you. And any last things that you want to? I know what I'm going to be doing this week. I'm going to be looking at the feelings of hunger, my own experience of my sexuality, movement and action, self-reflection, and creativity. I'm going to try to see how I can apply those ideas to everything that I'm doing. And how about you? What are you going to do, and what do you suggest for others?
I'm going to also work with those 5 things. Every time I sit down at my harp, I'm going to take a minute or two before I put my hands on the strings and start practicing or playing to really get in touch with my hunger for being at the harp. What is it I really am wanting in that moment in relationship to my music? And let that lead me, because too often I start disembodied with a creative idea of what I should be and how it should sound. So I'm going to work with those 5 by really giving myself time with each piece of music to track back to what's my elemental hunger and desire in relationship to that piece.
That is beautiful, and I will suggest that to all the people I'm working with, and I love that idea, tracking back, that we can track back to ourselves with everything we do. Kathleen, thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you next week and to finding out what we talk about then. And
Yes.
yes, and for everybody else, if you're on Facebook, I'll stay on just a little bit longer after we stop this to say hello. And thank you so, so much for being with us here today. Okay, bye.
Bye bye.